my protection.
Protection from what?
Koryuken.
We're gonna be in the new world in no time. This is exhilarating. Get excited.
Hello there, everyone. How are you doing out there? It's me, Yo Solo Mio, aka Solo Nate, here reacting to yet another video that was submitted to me by Giotto Cook. Giotto Cook has been waiting for me to react to this for quite some time. So, I don't want to take too long on the intro here, but I will say this. Giotto Cook shows up to our streams and every now and again just drops a big dono in there and says, hey, I want you to save this for a later reaction. Well, there's actually this, and then there's the other one that we have for Optinate, with me doing the 2.5-hour Spyro the Dragon video by Cadicarus, which I will get to shortly. And yeah, then of course Corinne asked me to watch a Smitty video that's like 40 plus minutes long. Yeah, I'm getting through my solo reaction backlog here, and I'm sorry if these take a while to come out. It's been a very busy last couple of months. You know, my dad having his heart attack, helping him recover, my mom's knee giving out on her and her potentially having surgery here in the next month. Also, it was Father's Day here recently, and it's also my birthday here soon. So it's just like, oof. My brain can't take much more of this. It's just one thing after another. But I'm trying my best, y'all. I'm trying my best to get through these, and I'm trying my best to do them as soon as possible, because I don't like to keep people waiting. I don't. And in all honesty, the fact that I've had to wait this long to do this reaction, which, when was this originally sent in? This one was sent in, gosh, I actually don't see the day that it was sent in, but it was sent in a while ago, in which, you know, I'm glad that I'm able to be getting to it. But yeah, this is all, this is absolutely insane. Just like all the stuff that people have, just the people who have sent all this to me. And yeah, once again, thank you again to everybody who sends me stuff to watch on stream, who sends me regular reactions and stuff like that. Thank you all so much. And though it may take me a while to get to it, rest assured, eventually I will. And, well, what we have here is Breadsword, The Lion King and the Disney's sequel Curse. So yeah, there's a lot to be said about Disney sequels. I could say about Disney sequels. I mean, Return of Jafar, Lion King 2. The one I really didn't understand why they made it Hunchback of Notre Dame Part 2. I'm just like, why? Why? Oh gosh. And I'm getting messaged. Hopefully this isn't an emergency. It's not, thank goodness. So, alright. Before any other distractions pop up, I'm going to watch this Breadsword video, and we're going to get through it, and I'm going to tell you what I think. Is everybody ready? Are you ready, Giotto Cook? Let's go.
You can't dance to it or nothing?
Yeah.
And all we did was dance to jazz.
The human condition.
After all, the wool of a black sheep is just as warm.
Is the idea that we really only understand things in hindsight.
Walt Disney's become pretty much synonymous with the word success in our collective vocabulary over the last century, at least by every metric we have available to us. As a company, it's ranked 50th on the Fortune 500 list, which I'm pretty sure is like the Smash PGR for capitalism or something. It has a nearly 40% share of its own market, which is terrifying, and nobody really seems to care that we're hurtling towards Film Monopoly 2 Electric Boogaloo, because understanding the history of antitrust laws is cringe and Spider-Man is pog. Point is, big boys make big toys, and if you've seen a cinematic spectacle in the last 30 or or so years, odds are the cavernous cartoon kingdom lay somewhere behind it. They're inescapable. It's like if the Borg sold Avatar plushies. And in the mighty jungle of the animation industry, Disney is the unassailable crowned king. But for all their countless successes and cherished classics, lightning has seemingly never wanted to strike twice for the House of Mouse. And no matter how vast their dominion has become, they've still never released a memorable sequel. With one exception. And I wanted to find out why. So I did what any normal person would do, and I spent a month and a half rewatching every single animated film that Disney has ever released in pursuit of a single, surprisingly complex question. What makes a story timeless? Anyways, that's what I'm gonna spend the next however long I feel like talking cool about, so put in your thinking caps and strap in. I'm really smart, and this is The Lion King, and Disney's sequel curse.
In a cafe, or sometimes on a crowded street, I've been near you, but you never noticed me. Oh, Cherie Amoore, won't you tell me how could you ignore that behind that little smile I adore? How I wish that you were mine, baby. I wish you were. Come on, darling. I wish you were.
Before we talk about the big LK, we gotta talk a little bit about the studio's history, and there's no better place to start than with a Teflon Don himself, Walt Disney. Walt Elias Disney was born in Chicago in 1901, and by the time he was 4, he'd already developed an extraordinary vocation for art, even being paid by a retired neighbor to draw his horse for him in Marceline, Missouri, where Walt's family had moved to in 1906. He quickly began copying the drawings on the front pages of his father's newspapers, and not long after that, he would become appointed as the illustrator for his own school's weekly gazette. Walt was on the fast track to pursuing a career in the visual arts, and everybody knew it. Everyone except Walt, that is, because no sooner did he accept his position as a cartoonist than he volunteered for the US military to help in the fight of World War I. After his application was rejected due to him being too young, Walt forged his own documents, reapplied, and was promptly shipped away to France with the Red Cross, where he would draw cartoons on the side of his ambulance and even make it into the military's own newspaper, Stars and Stripes. It had become abundantly clear by this point that no matter where in the world Walt could go, art would surely follow. So upon his return from the war, he took up a job as an apprentice artist at Pesman Rubin Commercial Art, where he'd soon befriend a fellow employee by the name of Ub Iwerks, the eventual creator of Mickey Mouse. After a couple layoffs and a floundered startup, Disney decided to enter the world of cell animation by selling short cartoons to a local theater called Laugh-O-Grams. Walt had long nurtured an interest in old fairy tales, particularly Aesop's fables, and he felt the best way to take the young medium forward was to reach far, far into the past. So the first 6 Laugh-O-Grams ever produced were re-adaptations of bygone fantasies. The success of the Laugh-O-Grams led Walt to establishing Laugh-O-Grams Studios, where he hired his first staff, Hugh Harmon and Rudolph Ising, the eventual founders of Warner Brothers and Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Animation.
Isn't it amazing that, all these people have, have these connections to Walt Disney, but yet Walt Disney, Ubi Works and the creators of MGM Animation and Warner Brothers Animation, Looney Tunes and Tom and Jerry and various other, just titans in animation throughout the classic era from the 1940s all the way up through the 60s. Unbelievable.
And of course, his old friend, Ub Iwerks. The company quickly went bankrupt, producing a 12-minute-long animation reel of Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. But after Walt traveled to Hollywood to visit his brother Roy, who had been recovering from tuberculosis there, he got a call from New York that would change the entire course of cinematic history forever. Margaret J. Winkler. See, Winkler was a huge deal in the cartoon world at the time as one of the top film distributors, but in spite of her significant stature and solid reputation, she had just learned that she was on the brink of losing the rights to her 2 biggest properties, Out of the Inkwell and Felix the Cat, and she was in need of a replacement pronto. The money Walt made from signing the contract with Winkler for what would become the Alice comedies allowed him and Roy to open the Disney Brothers studio, moving from Kansas to Hollywood and persuading Iwerks once again to come with them. And the rest is history. 1926, Disney Brothers reincorporates as Walt Disney Studio. 1928, after losing their contract for Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, Disney links up with composer Carl Stalling to create the first synchronized sound animation, featuring eWorks' new character, Mickey Mouse, in the now iconic short Steamboat Willie. A year later, Mickey becomes the most popular cartoon in the country. In 1932, Disney signs a contract with Technicolor to utilize a new 3-strip color process. The first Silly Symphony short to follow, Flowers and Trees, becomes a meteoric success, along with the Three Little Pigs released the following year, even having its theme song, Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf, chart as a hit single. And their colorful scenes, supported by Walt's innovative storyboarding, creates a massive deluge of cash for the company. And finally, in 1934, Walt announces his plan to create the first full-length, traditionally animated film ever. The Brothers Grimm's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
Took him over okay, he announced that in 1934. It didn't come out till 1937. That's insane to me, man. And the fact that we're approaching, we are 12 years away from 100 years since the first animated, full-length animated film ever. That's unbelievable to me.
The film industry at large were quick to mock the lofty ambition as Disney's folly, as the small handful of feature animations to date were scarcely known outside of their countries of origin and created using cutouts, silhouettes, or claymation. But the critics would soon learn to eat their words, because upon Snow White's release, it became the highest-grossing film in the medium's young history overnight, raking in $8 million in its first year alone. Adjusted to inflation, about 158 big ones, or 15,000 pairs of Yeezy 2 Platinums. No one could dismiss
Why the hell would you buy those?
Disney or the success of animation as a fluke any longer. And 88 years later on the dot, the Walt Disney Company has become the single most ubiquitous animation studio on the planet, having successfully cemented themselves into our collective consciousness by following in the footsteps that Walt had so carefully laid out before them, taking the many timeless tales of our towering past and breathing into them new life. Anyways, with our historical frame of reference now firmly in place, I think it's time we talk about one of the greatest tales of them all. A testament to the very premise Walt founded the studio on. One of the most brilliant adaptations of a piece of literature in film. A masterpiece among masterpieces, the musical and narrative heights of which soar beyond reproach. I'm talking, of course, about The Lion King. One and a half.
Oh God, that one really?
Weight is the look for this fall. Of course,
hey, what's going on?
In every magazine.
You're sitting on the remote.
Huh? You've got that long
sorry.
strap.
I thought it was a brownie.
Clear your coats.
Okay, The Lion King, the original Lion King, is fantastic. I love it. It's a testament to the beauty of traditional animation and the power of musical storytelling, and I genuinely think it's one of the most significant films ever produced. But I'm kind of only using it as a jumping off point to talk about its way worse, way weirder younger brother. I imagine this isn't too dissimilar to how my family introduces me. See, The Lion King was released in 1994, smack dab in the middle of what's colloquially known by gamer girls and fishing freaks alike as the Disney Renaissance.
The Disney-sance. The Disney Renaissance, yeah.
Period of time from the late 80s through the 90s where the Big D's stacked Big B's and managed to miraculously save their own studio from becoming insolvent by dropping an unprecedented number of back-to-back hits for pennies on the dollar for what they used to spend producing them.
Thank you, Jeffrey Katzenberg, for getting things in order. Although I will say this, Katzenberg, from what a lot of people said, was very equivalent to that of a dictator whenever he was running the studio. Although there are people who say that, then there's other people who say that he actually did a really good job and that he was a great boss to work for. But yeah, Katzenberg, the first one that Katzenberg had like streamlined production on was The Little Mermaid, and that's considered the first of the Disney Renaissance. True unsung hero of like unsung, like how great it is. The Great Mouse Detective. I love The Great Mouse Detective. That's one of the most underrated films ever.
When The Lion King was in production, most of Disney's senior staff were delegated to working on Pocahontas instead, and it was viewed internally as the more desirable of the two projects, running up its budget by an extra like $10 million, while leaving TLK to be handled by what some might call Disney's B team. This is often characterized as the studio simply not having much faith in The Lion King, but a large portion of it can actually be attributed to one project requiring a considerably higher level of artistic detail, and the other one being technically much less complex, notably featuring no human faces or hands. Couple this with a widespread stigma at the time that only movies about human beings were capable of earning critical acclaim or winning awards, and the really stark divide in resources starts to make a lot more sense. Keep this in mind, it's a surprise tool that can help us later. The Lion King is the first Disney feature to not begin as an adaptation from any one source material. It has no specific point of origin, besides a vague pitch on a flight to Europe in 1988 with Peter Schneider, Jeffrey Katzenberg, and Roy E. Disney.
It's literally Hamlet. It's Hamlet, but with a more, like, big, maniacal, evil bad guy. And also, not only that, but also, Kimba the White Lion. Y'all want to see something creepy? Look up the similarities between The Lion King and Kimba the White Lion.
One of them had floated the idea of a story set in Africa, and after excitedly agreeing with the notion, Katz quickly strayed from the topic and began ruminating over his childhood and the tribulations of becoming an adult. This time there was no great fairy tale, no fantastic myth, merely a vague emotional idea emanating from nowhere in particular. The moment you realize that you are a child no longer. Because there was nothing to base it on, The Lion King went through a ton more treatments than the average film, and it evolved and shifted drastically over the course of its development because of this. Originally, it was King of the Kalahari, a grim drama narrated by a vulture named Scobie, and then it was King of the Beasts, a war film with a much more realistic documentarian approach, centered around a battle between lions and baboons led by a monkey named Scar, until finally, years after its treatment, having gone through a slew of writers and multiple directors, its world began to take on a more defined shape. And the one it took was oddly familiar. The Lion King opens with maybe one of the most iconic introductory shot opening theme combos in film history. A colossal sun rising in the distance, illuminating the plains of the Great Rift Valley in East Africa, where the film is set, as Lebo M's masterful overture underscores the vibrant establishing shots of the natural kingdom we're about to enter. I love this, by the way, because it's also maybe the most literal opening theme ever. If you translate the Zulu that Lebo is singing into English, Nans Ingonyama Bagiti Baba Siti Ingonyama literally just means, here comes a lion, father, oh yes, it's a lion. Speaking of lions, there's lions. This one's named Mufasa, and he's framed triumphantly above the rest of the kingdom below, so we know that he must be important. Mufasa is the sacrificial lamb to our actual main character, his son Simba's, arc in the story. The great tragedy suffered by our hero to thrust them into the wide world and down their heroic and harrowing path. He's the Uncle Ben of the Serengeti cinematic universe. Simba is Paul Atreides with a tail. The first 30 or so minutes of the film do a fantastic job of acquainting us with the various relationships between its cast, Simba, Nala, Mufasa, Sarabi, Rafiki, Zazu, and Scar, and it's all done to set up this viciously effective rug pull about a third of the way through, wherein Scar betrays Mufasa, his brother, killing him and usurping his throne as King of Pride Rock, in place of Simba, who's abandoned his royal claim and fled the Pride Lands in his throes of grief. Mufasa is shorthand for king, as it was the name of the last pre-colonial king of the kingdom of Buganda, Mutisa. Again, a very literal use of language in this film. In fact, the Swahili word for king is very close to their names as well, Mfalme. Pretty much every character in The Lion King is given a similarly straightforward name, which correlates their primary function within its plot. Sarabi is Swahili for mirage, because she's kept fooled by Scar as to the true nature of Mufasa's death, and in turn, this cluelessness provides legitimacy to his rule. Rafiki is Mufasa in Simba's council, and his name is Swahili for friend. Nala is an abbreviation of the verb nakula, more specifically ninakula, informally used in areas like coastal Tanzania and Mombasa to mean I eat. Nala, as a lioness, reunites with Simba purely by chance, having strayed beyond the Pride Lands to hunt for food. Shenzi, the leader of the hyenas, is Swahili for barbarous, and Scar is actually one of the only non-Swahili named characters in the entire movie, highlighting the extent to which he is implicitly ostracized in its text. Shakespeare often does the same thing, most notably in Hamlet, using very forthright naming conventions to bestow his characters titles that reflect what they narratively represent. Hamlet, his protagonist in a foreign land, is given a common English name, meaning home, to connect with his common English audience, while his antagonist is given a Roman Latin name, Claudius, meaning lame or crippled, the very same name of the Roman emperor who conquered Britain in the first place. Actually, now that I think about it, a young prince whose father dies at the hands of his brother, with whom his mother lies. Oh my God, the Lion King is Hamlet.
Yes! I've been saying that for years. I have literally been saying that forever. It's literally Hamlet.
Okay, so the Lion King is totally Hamlet. Mufasa and Simba are Hamlet and Hamlet Jr., Sarabi is Gertrude, Nala is Ophelia, Scar is Claudius, Rafiki...
Yeah, and thank goodness they Disneyfied, like, the ending for Ophelia, because what happens to Ophelia in Hamlet is just horrible. Well, of course, the difference is Hamlet went for vengeance. He wanted revenge. Simba just wanted to make things right.
Rafiki is Horatio. I mean, it all lines up. Remember earlier when I said The Lion King is the first animated feature from Disney to not be founded on any specific source material? Well, that wasn't a lie, but after years of rewriting and reconceptualizing what its world and its characters would eventually be, the writers unintentionally began to shape Pride Rock into a faint reflection of the Danish court. And when directors Rob Minkoff and Roger Allers finally noticed the uncanny, subconscious similarities between them, they decided to go full send on retelling one of the greatest tragedies ever written, with as much irreverence and goofiness as they felt like, because it was never supposed to be Hamlet to begin with. First off, and just to get out of the way, there are obviously a few pretty clear deviations between the plot beats of Hamlet and the plot beats of The Lion King. This is primarily seen in the absence of like half the main characters' deaths. Scar and Mufasa are the only two KOs retained in the script, which actually still gives it one of the highest kill counts of any Disney movie. They obviously needed to perish for the structure of the tragedy to work, but instead of outright bloodshed, the writers instead chose to obscure their deaths from being direct on-screen murders. In the story of Hamlet, Claudius assassinates his brother the king by dripping a poison vial into his ear as he sleeps. But in The Lion King, Mufasa isn't actually killed by Scar's hand at all. Or paw, I guess. Mufasa survives the initial fall from Scar pushing him and then is killed by a passing stampede of wildebeest instead. He and Scar both are thrown from great heights, survive their falls, and then meet their ends at the mercy of other animals in the natural kingdom, as opposed to perishing from the direct actions of a main character. This obviously wouldn't hold up in a court of law, but it does play cool with the censors. Similarly, all direct mention of sex is off the table, especially the subtextual suggestions of Hamlet maybe having a thing for Gertrude's big mommy milkers. Understand.
You hear that again?
Table, especially the subtextual suggestions of Hamlet maybe having a thing for Gertrude's big mommy milkers. Understandably so. This is the change that arguably has the most substantial impact on the emotional landscape of the film, as Sarabi's characterization isn't her being happily betrothed to the treacherous new king, nor is Simba's being obsessed with this, but it instead shows her reluctantly working alongside him for the survival of the kingdom, while keeping him at arm's reach. The feelings of betrayal for Simba are consolidated into a single character, Scar, which renders the rest of the deaths in Hamlet mostly unnecessary, and because of the film's shift in its portrayal of death, Simba doesn't even learn he was betrayed until the last 10 minutes of the film. In Hamlet, members of the Night's Watch are visited by the silent ghost of the fallen King Hamlet, which leads to young Hamlet seeking him out and learning of Claudius's treacherous act straight from the horse's mouth, serving as kind of the rising action in its tragic structure. But Mufasa's appearance takes on a much more nebulous and emotionally resonant form, as he doesn't really talk about his death at all, and instead simply urges Simba to remember who he is, to come to terms with his feelings and become the man he was always meant to be. Become the lion he was always meant to be? Whatever. Point is, there are a lot of changes, but the similarities far outweigh them. One of the most famous scenes in Hamlet is of Hamlet coming across a graveyard, wherein he stops to talk with a clown-like gravedigger, as the skull of the former king's jester, Yorick, lies on the ground beside him. Upon realizing—
Alas, poor Yorick. I knew him well.
Who it is, Hamlet picks it up and gazing back into its eyes, sadly exclaims, "Alas, poor Yorick," the moment bestowing upon him a newfound, sobering awareness of his own mortality. This is mirrored in the elephant graveyard scene in The Lion King, where Simba looks into the eyes of a giant skull and, after being warned by Zazu that they're far from home, is greeted by a trio of laughing hyenas that emerge from it. A grave, a skull, and their jesters. Something especially interesting about the way The Lion King adapts this tale is that it doesn't simply do away with its tertiary characters, but rather folds them into its comparatively more intimate cast.
Correction, I know your father.
Leaving the few who remain much richer as a result. For instance, Mufasa's ghost speech to Simba actually being Polonius' speech to Laertes as he's leaving home. "This above all to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night the day, thou canst not then be false to any man. Farewell, my blessing season this in thee."
You have forgotten who you are, and so forgotten me. Look inside yourself, Simba.
Also, it helps having friggin' James Earl Jones as the voice of reason in your mind. If I had my inner monologue in my mind be read by James Earl Jones, I would get so much more shit done. I'd conquer the world. But sadly, I have to deal with my voice, and it's nowhere near as epic as James Earl Jones.
You are more than what you have become. You must take your place in the circle of life.
How can I go back? I'm not who I used to be.
Remember who you are. You are my son, and the one true king. Remember who you are.
Not to imply that the Funny Lion musical is better than Shakespeare, but I do think that this lends itself to making The Lion King more relatable, easier to connect to, than Hamlet, as a result of the way it condenses and combines and recaptures its many characters. I mean, after all, Hamlet is Shakespeare's longest play. Its Elizabethan performances lasted over 2 hours, and transposing this to film makes it run over 4. Don't get me wrong, I adore long movies. Anybody that I forced to watch all the Lord of the Rings extended editions in one sitting with me can tell you that, but I don't think it's sacrilege to admit the value in this sort of transformative, abridged storytelling. For all the grief Hamlet endures, the love of his father is scarcely demonstrated in the text, because we're meant to view him in contrast to his counterpart Laertes, whose dad sends him to school with extra gushers and works at Nintendo and Microsoft at the same time. But without sufficient time to reenact its 4,000 lines of prose and verse, it's much more effective to instead allow Simba to exist as the whole self of these two halves, to not simply suggest, but to show in some detail the level of affection his father and him share, to better accentuate the severity of his sorrow. Zazu is Ronaldo and Francisco, as he is both a watchman of the castle and keeps an eye on Simba's comings and goings, and he shares much of Horatio's traits with Rafiki as well. Scar actually fills the role of both Claudius and Laertes in the final confrontation of the film, as he is at once the character who duels Simba and the one who antagonizes him into this duel in the first place. Simba is Hamlet and Laertes and Fortinbras, the Prince of Norway who wishes to reclaim the throne after King Hamlet's death at the onset of the play, and successfully does so following the tragedy's crescendo, as well as the death of young Hamlet, Gertrude, Claudius, Laertes, and pretty much everyone else. And it works. Excellent.
Ah, yes, rich tragedies.
The Lion King, not in spite of its changes, but because of them, is one of the greatest adaptations of the tragedy ever put to a screen.
Hello? Yo. Recording a solo video. Yeah, what's up? Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's me. Alright, dude. Yeah, it was Nick just checking, making sure that everything was okay. Alright.
By virtue of its ability to connect with a far greater number of people than it otherwise could have, no matter how much more faithful Olivier's or Kozinstev's or Brana's are. But the Lion King is in Hamlet alone. In the literary canon of Shakespeare, there are 3 basic genres of his work as defined in the First Folio, the first published collection of his writing after his death. And these are the comedies, the tragedies, and the histories. And what we're gonna focus on is that last one. See, Shake Shack didn't just write hyper-depressive misery porn about the different ways Shouty got him acting different, he wrote some pretty pog epics as well, the histories. And the most notable group of these is referred to as the Henriad. The Henriad is a collection of dual historical tetralogies, following the rise of Prince Hal, his ascent to the throne as King Henry V, Henry VI's succession of him, and the subsequent rise of King Richard III. And they are sequenced as follows. Richard
III. Sorry, Richard II. I forgot drama llama stuff with Richard II.
Henry IV Part 1 and 2, Henry V, Henry VI Parts 1 through Tres, and last but certainly not least, Halo 3. What I just said is a little contentious in Shakespeare world because the Henriad originally only meant the first 4 plays, but is contemporarily accepted to mean either the 4 or all 8, because the latter tetralogy follows the War of the Roses and is tonally distinct from the former. But kind of like how some people insist on pointing out that there's actually a 4th genre of Shakespeare called the Roman plays, it's not super important and doesn't really matter a whole lot. So if it crossed your mind to comment, well, actually, before I clarify that I understand this, I want you to know that I hate you, and I mean it, and it's not a joke. Anyways, back to the Henriad. Henry V, aka Henry of Monmouth, is genuinely a no-brainer as far as epic historical protagonists go. He ascended the throne at the end of a literally 100-year-long war that his kingdom was on the losing side of, and only reigned for like a decade. But he won nearly every battle he ever fought, is still revered as one of the greatest warrior kings in written history, and nearly conquered the entirety of France with less than half their forces, culminating in the Battle of Agincourt, where he led 6,000 Englishmen to victory against 15,000 French, only losing about 600 of his soldiers while killing 6,000 of France's. In fact, some of the most ubiquitous lines that Shakespeare ever wrote reside in the Henriad, specifically Henry V, not the tragedies. Once more to the breach, dear friends, we few, we happy few. You get the picture. He was literally shot in the face with an arrow in the middle of a battle when he was 16, and then had it pulled out of his bone so that he could return to war as soon as possible. Bro stepped out of Fist of the North Star and became a real person on accident. Unfortunately for him, though, he died like 2 years after signing the Treaty of Troyes with France. There's no way that's how that's pronounced.
In French, it is pronounced Troyes.
Huh. After signing the Treaty of Troyes, that made him the heir apparent of the French throne, leaving his infant son Henry VI to rule as a puppet in his place, a la Anduin Rin, and the only monarch in history to be crowned as both the King of England and the King of France at the same time. Problem was, without his pops, this started a ton more wars, now without a goofy anime protagonist king to lead them. And this made a lot of people, even in his own family, want to usurp him, which they did several times until they eventually killed him. Henry VI was said to be timid, kind, averse to violence, and above all else, passive, which made him one of the most benevolent kings in Europe's bloody history, and one of the tamest protagonists throughout Shakespeare's works. But this also made him kind of a huge pussy, which all but guaranteed the ruin of his house. And this is what the trilogy of Henry VI mostly covers: the contrast between his heroic and beloved father and himself, the expectations thrust upon him, the subversive gentleness of his spirit, and the innumerable ways in which literally every single person in his life, including the penniless woman who married for love instead of diplomacy, who'd secretly been plotting against him the entire time anyways, were committed to taking advantage of this gentleness and hurting him for it over and over again, culminating in his imprisonment by his nephew King Edward IV, who usurped him, in his subsequent death at the hands of Edward's brother, Richard III. Richie is one of the most complex protagonists in Shakespeare's canon, in the sense that he is arguably the worst human being we follow in the category of hero in any of the plays, and that's exactly why he's important to us. Nearly everyone hated him, he hated nearly everyone back, and Scar isn't just Claudius, he's Richard.
To all bear such as are of better person than myself, I'll make my heaven to dream upon the crown.
See, Richard III was part of the House of York, one of the 2 sides in the War of the Roses, which kind of sounds like something that happened in The Witcher, but I promise it's real. That's just how British people talk. And the reason he's so infamous is that he killed almost his entire family to make sure that he would be the only one left to take the throne following his brother King Edward IV's untimely death. A pair of his youngest victims in this lust for power were actually his nephews, Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury, referred to in whispers as the princes in the Tower, because they were locked away in the Tower of London as kids and then never seen or heard from again, so Richard could declare them illegitimate heirs and take the throne in their place, imprisoning and killing them just like his weak nerd bitch Uncle Henry. Richard also suffered from severe scoliosis, limiting his ability to engage personally in battles considerably, and earning him the crude nickname Crookback, accentuating the already intense distrust and disdain of him from pretty much everyone in his life, which is fucked up, but it does shed some light on how he's characterized in Shakespeare's play: a rudely stamped hunchback, determined to prove a villain and hate the idle pleasures of these days. The perfect opposite to Henry V. You remember earlier when I mentioned the super literal naming conventions in The Lion King and how Shakespeare often does the same thing, using Hamlet and Claudius as an example? Well, the other reason that Claudius is such a brilliant choice of name in contrast to Hamlet's is that, removed from the perspective of an English audience who associates Claudius at best with a foreign land and at worst with a complete steamrolling of their people, Claudius Caesar was actually a pretty fantastic emperor. He restored Macedonia and Achaea's senatorial provinces, he expanded the rights of women, he included freed slaves in the imperial bureaucracy, he built new roads, aqueducts, and canals, and he pulled the empire away from the brink of financial ruin after...
Also, Claudius
at best with a foreign land and at worst with a complete steamrolling of their people, Claudius Caesar was actually a pretty fantastic emperor. He restored...
Hold on. Let me check and make sure that I'm getting this right before I make a fool of myself. Yes, it is. It is amazing. I thought that was him. Derek Jacobi. Derek Jacobi is the same actor who plays Claudius. He plays Claudius here in Hamlet, one of the most famous renditions of Hamlet, Kenneth Branagh's Hamlet.
Claudius at best with a foreign land and at worst with a complete steamrolling of their people, Claudius Caesar.
He plays him here again in I, Claudius, the BBC miniseries.
There was actually a pretty fantastic emperor. He restored Macedonia and Achaea's senatorial provinces, he expanded the rights of women, he included freed slaves in the imperial bureaucracy, he built new roads, aqueducts, and canals, and he pulled the empire away from the brink of financial ruin after Caligula's destructively extravagant reign. Claudius suffered from physical disabilities as well. He was known to walk with a limp and struggle from a speech impediment, but rather than informing his cruelty, it instead gave him a significantly greater depth of empathy and spurred him on to become a formidable intellectual as well. For a more contemporary frame of reference, Claudius was also the inspiration for Tyrion Lannister. In fact, there's a number of passages in George R.R. Martin's writing that are nearly one-to-one replications of dialogue found in a historical novel about him, I, Claudius, written by Robert Graves in the 1930s. Basically, next to Augustus, he was the only decent emperor in the Julio-Claudian dynasty, the first 5 emperors of Rome. His villainy is entirely dependent on what side of the frame you're looking at him through. Maybe the real tragedy of Hamlet is how alone young Hamlet is in feeling that it is one. Nearly everyone else in the story appears almost completely unaffected by the loss of his father. His mother seems overjoyed with Claudius, and Claudius, besides his hand in the murder itself, seems to be a courteous man and a well-beloved, intelligent ruler when we aren't looking at him through the lens of Hamlet's understandable malice. There's no great discontent within the kingdom, or even within Claudius's own court. He's overheard repenting for the harm he's done to ascend the throne, and even goes to considerable lengths to comfort Hamlet and help him reconcile with his loss, only choosing to take action against him after he realizes that Hamlet is going to expose and kill him. Claudius Caesar's death at the hands of his wife Agrippina the Younger, who was later murdered in turn by their young son Nero, is reflected quite deliberately in Shakespeare's tragedy as well, as he was a massive fan of Plutarch's histories, and Hamlet himself even points out the similarities in its third act. O heart, lose not thy nature. Let not ever the soul of Nero enter this firm bosom. Let me be cruel, not unnatural. Like, if Hamlet's the only character to mourn his father for longer than a month, and everyone else seems perfectly content to accept Claudius's rule, what does that tell us about the fallen King Hamlet? Horatio says it himself in the first act. He was no better, if not worse. A bloody man. He murdered the old King Fortinbras and took his throne. He appears as a ghost to both the Night's Watch and his son in full armament, ready to go off to battle again. As thou art to thyself, such was the very armor he had on when he the ambitious Norway combated. So frowned he once when, in an angry parley, he smote the slitted poleaxe on the ice. 'Tis strange. Claudius.
Yeah, there was actually the Norseman. The Norseman. Basically, hold on. It basically had the same story element as Hamlet. Hold on. Northman. Yep, there it is. 2022. Yeah. Robert Eggers. Go figure. So, yeah. This film I'll say this. It was definitely something that I'm glad I watched in theaters. But, yeah. This, yeah, based on Emma, well, the fact that it's a, is that a spider? Hold on. I think I see a spider. Let me look real quick. Yes, it is. That is a spider. There's a spider hanging from the ceiling in front of the TV screen. Hold on. Okay. There we go. Sorry about that. But yeah, Amalith. The story of Amalith is very similar to that of like the king not being a good person, like Amalith's father being killed by Fjolnir. So yeah. Anyway, yeah, just wanted to point that out real quick before we continued.
Never did these things. In fact, his method of usurping his brother is the exact opposite of a violent death, even if the action is still loathsome. A quiet passing in his sleep, marking the transition of yet another king. But a thriving, healthy kingdom and the love of his queen, as well as the admiration of his people, don't really sound like Scar. Nor do the words gentle or discreet fit the manner in which Mufasa was killed. Which is why, beyond his explicit service to the Lion King's plot, Scar is nothing like Claudius at all. But he is a lot like Richard, the last king of the House Plantagenet, deeply embittered and brutally envious of his family, bowed of body and dark of hair, bearing the sigil of a lion. Under Scar's rule, the Pride Lands don't thrive as they did in Elsinore and Denmark. They become a barren and inhospitable place, mirroring Richard's soliloquy at the onset of his play, marking the Henriade's end. Now is the winter of our discontent. The coalescence of these characters, combining the intellect and charisma of Claudius with the malevolence and physically meek form of Richard III, utilizing it the same as Shakespeare does as a visual analog to the contrast between his family and himself, gives us one of the most distinct villains in the entire canon of animation. And it is precisely because the writers and directors and animators who brought the world of the Lion King to life managed to entrench themselves in incredibly rich source material, without ever feeling beholden to preserving its form.
Life's not fair, is it? You see, I shall never be king.
And whiles I live to account this world but hell, until this misshaped trunk that bears this head be round impaled with a glorious crown.
When The Lion King was released in 1994, 6 years after its conception, and produced by a fledgling crew delegated to a less prestigious project that most thought would never even be considered for an award, it became the highest-grossing traditionally animated film of all time, following in the footsteps of Disney's original Folly, earning over $1 billion at the box office and winning 2 Academy Awards as well as 3 Golden Globes, 1 for Best Film. So much for prestige, I guess. And The Lion King ends as it began. Simba having returned and restored balance to the kingdom, Rafiki holding his and Nala's cub up to their subjects below and to us, marking its close in a visual facsimile of the sunrise that had opened on, a reprise of the circle of life soaring into the foreground as its credits roll. In the words of Horatio in the last scene of Hamlet's final act, "Flights of angels, sing thee to thy rest." But that rest was rather short-lived, because just a few years later, a direct-to-video sequel to The Lion King would be released, produced by the actual B-team of Disney, Walt Disney Video Premieres, aka Disney Toon Studios, an amalgam of smaller animation teams established by Disney in countries like France, Japan, Australia, and Canada to better nurture young talent from around the world. And what do you know, they liked Shakespeare too. The Lion King 2 is Romeo and Juliet. Literally, actually, just Romeo and Juliet. Kiara loves Kovu, Kovu loves Kiara, both their families disapprove, you get it. It's the Montagues and the Capulets with fuzzy wuzzy paws, and nobody's allowed to K-word themselves. And it's decent. Second of the top 3 when it comes to Disney's sequels. But they didn't stop there either, because in 2004, Disney Toons produced a 3rd movie in the Lion King universe. And this one was weird.
That's putting it lightly. Good lord. Okay, so I need to go back and watch Lion King 1.5 because when I was a kid, I didn't like it that much. Or when I was younger. I wasn't a kid, technically, when this came out. When I was younger, I didn't like this as much. Apparently, I'm missing something. So, yeah.
But maybe it'll be safer if I just show him where I came from.
Oh boy, do we get to see where you grew up?
Yeah, Pumbaa, but it ain't pretty. Please remain seated while the camera is in motion. Here we are.
Oh, it slaps so hard! The Lion King 1.5 is brilliant. It's far and away the best Disney sequel. The only good one, in my opinion. And I've probably watched it more than any other film Disney's ever released, besides maybe a Goofy movie. Basically what I'm trying to say is, it's really Pog. And although it might not appear so at first, I think it might be the most Shakespearean Disney film of them all. Let me explain. The film opens the same way The Lion King did, with a brilliant sunrise illuminating the savannah below, setting the frame ablaze with a myriad of scintillating oranges and reds. Except when the musical accompaniment we've come to expect rushes in, it's quickly drowned out by Timon mockingly singing over it in a shrill, goofy voice before pausing the movie and fast-forwarding it to the part where he and Pumbaa come in. Whereas in The Lion King 1 and 2, our plot follows the royal line of succession quite directly, not unlike Hamlet or the Henriade, The Lion King 1.5 is a meta-commentary comedy prequel/midquel to the original, starring a pair of its supporting characters, Timon and Pumbaa, embarking on their own adventure throughout the world as the main plot of the film takes place in the background, the two periodically cutting in throughout its runtime for these silhouetted, fourth-wall-breaking riff sessions, not unlike the original Mystery Science Theater 3000. The movie, in particular, as the outcome of the story our characters are watching, has a tangible material effect on their lives. In place of the Circle of Life, we're ushered into our alternate Lion King campaign, if you will, by a colony of meerkats singing about their life of never-ending fear, digging tunnels and then digging some more in the hopes of staying hidden away from their innumerable predators. Even though it's an incredibly upbeat song musically, its lyrics are like the spiritual equivalent of working in a call center. This shit is actually super depressing, and just like the Circle of Life, it being our opening theme demonstrates the ethos of the journey we're about to embark on really effectively. This time, not by the words being sung, but by the way our hero is juxtaposed against them. Timon is the only meerkat whose voice is not a part of the chorus, both literally and metaphorically, and this is immediately made further clear by his own family not even being sure of where he is after the collectivist hellscape sing-along comes to an end, just before the cave collapses on top of them, revealing Timon and its end to the ire of his people.
Hey, everybody! Nice work, Timon. Way to go, Tunnel Klutz.
Yeah, hey, none of us like you. This is something the film does throughout its runtime, mimicking familiar story structures and plot beats. But unlike The Lion King, it does so with the explicit purpose of subverting and then mocking them. And Timon's introduction is probably the most clear example of this. The first 15 minutes of the film, give or take, are pretty much beat for beat Disney's Hercules, complete with the disapproving elder authority figure and contrasting love from his parent, as well as the 1-2 punch of messing up then messing up again when he tries to fix it. And when Timon leaves home in the following scene, it even perfectly mirrors the shot of Hercules leaving his parents after his true identity is revealed to him. Except in our story, the triumphant swelling of music is undercut by Timon's mom loudly yelling reminders to him while he frustratedly yells back that he can't hear her. This introduction also serves as an establishing measure for the film's rather unique internal sense of rhythm. Dramatic beat, followed by comedy noise, followed by musical crash, followed by dramatic beat, intermittently interpolated by these dramatic irony-laden fourth wall breaks. And it flows, actually, remarkably well. Better, in fact, than The Lion King 2, in spite of it being a much closer adaptation of Shakespeare than the original Lion King. And in spite of the fact that The Lion King 1.5 isn't an adaptation of Shakespeare at all. It's an adaptation of a Shakespeare parody. In 1937, a child is born in Czechoslovakia and almost overnight becomes a refugee, as his family flees imminent occupation at the onset of a little world war known as II. He goes on to attend boarding school in Darjeeling, nestled within the Indian Himalayas, subsequently settling in Britain where he eventually attends college in Nottingham and Yorkshire, first becoming a journalist, then a drama critic, and finally, in 1960, a playwright. The child's name is Tomas Straussler, better known as Tom Stoppard, and by the time The Lion King rolls around, he becomes one of the most revered playwrights in the contemporary English canon. His first significant work on the long path to acclaim being a big ol' banger by the name of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, an absurdist meta-theater comedy midquel of Hamlet, starring two of its supporting characters. The title is taken from the final scene in Hamlet, where an ambassador from England informs Horatio that the two friends of young Hamlet, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, have been killed in his place, on their way to what was supposed to be Hamlet's execution, just after Hamlet himself has died and bookended the play. The sight is dismal, and our affairs from England come too late. The ears are senseless that should give us hearing to tell him his commandment is fulfilled, that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. Where should we have our thanks? To which Horatio replies, bro, Hamlet totally didn't ask you to kill them, because poor Horatio doesn't know that Hamlet totally did. One of the central motifs of Hamlet as a story is the inherent confusion and misfortune that befalls anyone whose life is even tangentially connected to such a tragic figure, particularly those who mean him well, and chiefly among them are Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, his childhood friends who were summoned to Elsinore by Claudius to discover the source of Hamlet's despair, and with any luck, cure him of it. Claudius, after realizing that the root of Hamlet's madness is him discovering who killed his father, resolves that this can only end with one of their deaths, so he sends the trio of Hamlet, Rosencrantz, and Guildenstern to England under the guise of a therapeutic change of scenery, with a sealed royal decree that they've been ordered to give to the king the moment they arrive. On the journey there, Hamlet reads the letter in secret while the other two are asleep and discovers that it's actually an order to kill him, and without stopping to consider that his close friends surely couldn't have known the contents of the letter either, reforges the decree to order their executions instead, and then leaves them for dead when their ship is attacked. They are not near my conscience. Their defeat does by their own insinuation grow. 'Tis dangerous when the baser nature comes between the past and fell incensed points of mighty opposites. The soul of Nero, indeed. Luckily for us, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead spends almost no time with Hamlet at all, because he's kind of mean, instead capturing what the original tragedy's comparatively minor characters were doing while its central plot was taking place. Stoppard later wrote this into a screenplay and then directed the film adaptation himself, so I'm going to be using this version from here on out to compare and contrast with The Lion King 1.5 for the sake of visual consistency. Cool? Cool. Anyways, the film begins the morning they're summoned to Elsinore by Claudius, opening on a vast cliffside with no discernible markings by which to orient ourselves. Its surface visibly eroded by the countless millennia it stood there, a bank of disperse-sized pebbles set beneath its timeless face, as two small figures emerge center frame. Enter Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Rosencrantz sees a coin on the ground as they pass, and stopping to pick it up, begins to flip it to pass the time, and as he continues to do so, over and over again, it only ever offers a single outcome. Heads. Reasoning this must be a fluke, or perhaps a gambler's weighted coin, Guildenstern reaches for a coin from his own bag, but when it's flipped, it lands heads again, and then another, and another. Finally, Guildenstern bumps into Rosencrantz, and the coin they flipped falls to the ageless stone below. But when it comes to a stop, it comes up heads as well. The coin, as a visual motif used throughout the film, is the primary vessel through which our dynamic duo slowly become cognizant of the fact that they're both characters living inside of a story.
Also, not only that, but the fact that you have Tim Roth and Gary Oldman, just two amazingly talented actors, just wow.
After we cut away from the fallen coin, our duo now in a forest, Rosencrantz still flipping coins, the coins still coming up heads, the pair are greeted by a troupe of traveling actors. In Hamlet, these are known as simply the players, a group of thespians Hamlet had seen perform before and had been summoned to Elsinore to offer their services again. Their purpose is twofold. Narratively, to reveal to Claudius that Hamlet knows how his father died by performing the murder of Gonzago, a tragedy that reflects what he's done, and subtextually as an analysis of the power of storytelling itself, in the reactions their performance provokes from our characters. Stoppard takes this a step further by making them an extension of the writer themselves, the only characters who can truly see beyond the page and control their own fate. Omniscient and omnipotent observers, playing their parts because that's simply what they're here to do. Guildenstern bets their leader a coin flip, to which he knowingly replies with heads, but when the coin is revealed, it's finally landed tails, and the players disappear. This is the purpose of the theater cutaways in The Lion King 1.5. The narrative structure of both films can only work if their characters share an intuitive understanding of what they are inside of it. And while Stoppard takes a much slower, abstract approach, using the coin's unvarying outcome to reflect the grand design his characters have become ensnared within, they both establish the same understanding to their audience in pretty much the same way. The story knows it's a story, and the real story will be how it unfolds with that in mind. In spite of its eccentricities, though, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead is ultimately just a really profound buddy comedy, and The Lion King 1.5 captures this part of its spirit brilliantly. It's kind of like if Rush Hour 2 was set in 14th century Denmark. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern spend almost the entire film's runtime meandering around the various sets Hamlet takes place in, failing to solve any problems and sharing this sort of lovingly adversarial relationship as they continuously argue about the nature of their existence and the story they're trapped within, lampooning the very material it owes its existence to at every opportunity. One of my favorite scenes in the film is when, after appearing in Elsinore out of thin air, the two decide to play a game of tennis. But instead of serving a ball, they stand on opposite sides of the court and have a rhetorical debate as to why and how they got there, how neither can be sure they're even alive, and whose name is which, because the play has begun and they're starting to forget. The tragedy has already engrossed them. Nothing before or after it has or will happen anymore. And although we essentially share this understanding with them, the two are still confused as to why. So they argue. On the surface, these sound like completely dissonant films, tonally, but this dynamic and the basic form in which it's assembled is crucial to the reason The Lion King 1.5 works. After meeting Claudius and Gertrude in Elsinore, Rosencrantz turns to Guildenstern and says he thinks they're in over their head, that they should turn back. But as they once again devolve into petty arguing, the two come to a sullen realization. They can't. Just as Hamlet and the Skull of Yorick are given new form in The Lion King's Elephant Graveyard, this scene is mirrored in The Lion King 1.5. Here, after Timon and Pumbaa repeatedly fail to find a new home by stumbling through a number of major plot beats of the original film, like the background of Scar's about to become a villain sing-along or the wildebeest stampede that put Mufasa on a Gildan, culminating in them falling down a waterfall, Timon melodramatically tells Pumbaa that he can leave him there to wallow in defeat, and that he should just go home, to which Pumbaa replies, there's nowhere for him to go home to. In the case of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, the purgatorial nature of Shakespeare's world robs them of their own memory, and by extension, the will to turn back.
We're in over our steps, heading out of death, stepping out of our heads.
It's all heading to a dead stop.
There.
Hasn't it ever happened to you that all of a sudden, for no reason at all, you haven't the faintest idea how to spell the word witch or house? Because when you write it down, you just can't remember ever having seen those letters in that order before.
And in the case of Timon and Pumbaa, the ability to return to where they began has become subdued all the same.
I've been dragging you down long enough. I'm going home, and I suggest you do the same.
Oh, I would if I could, but I can't.
Oh, sure you can, buddy. I won't stop you.
No, I mean, I don't have a home.
You don't? What happened? Are you lost? No place good enough for you? What, you're all alone in this big empty world?
Yeah.
Oh. Also, unlike The Lion King, there isn't really a need to condense The Lion King 1.5 source material into fewer moving parts, because there's only a small handful of them to begin with, and the two leads of our tale already occupy an overwhelming majority of its script, so its writers made the galaxy brain decision to commit even harder to the duo's already contrasting personalities, lending them much clearer characterizations and contriving a ton more opportunities for the two to bounce off of each other, both comedically and emotionally, without flanderizing any of what gave their dynamic charisma in the first place. The palpable sense that these two are stuck together no matter what and no matter how the story ends. And lucky for Timon and Pumbaa, it's still a Disney movie, so their ending gets to be a bit happier. This pattern of Timon and Pumbaa accidentally wandering into major plot beats of the original film, both before and after they meet and adopt baby Simba, is actually played incredibly close to the source material it's taken from. For almost the entire duration of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, they speak completely normally, as you or I would, if a bit more anxious and energetic, so maybe just how I would. But the second they wander into a scene that took place in the original Hamlet, it's like they instinctively take on the role of the characters they're trapped within, and the scene is played exactly how Shakespeare wrote it, only for them to to return to normal immediately afterwards.
Both your majesty's might, by the sovereign power you have of us, put your dread pleasures more into command than to entreat.
But we both obey, and here give up ourselves in the full bent to lay our service freely at your feet to be commanded.
I could jump over the side. That'll put a spoke in their wheel.
Unless they're counting on it.
I shall remain on board. That'll put a spoke in their wheel.
The difference is, of course, less overt, because Timon and Pumbaa aren't code-switching between 400 years of linguistic evolution, but the effect remains pretty much the same.
And if he falls in love tonight...
Look! You don't even know what I've been through.
I would if you just tell me.
Forget it.
Fine.
Pumbaa, do you know what this means?
He can't express his feelings and she has commitment issues?
There's this really charming atmosphere of almost mischievousness because of this, you know? Like, we're sneaking around backstage in this fictional theme park and seeing things we weren't supposed to, only for the characters to snap back into place on whatever predetermined beat we've come to in the track. Speaking of this being a Disney movie, it's a Disney movie, so of course it has a myriad of musical numbers to accompany it, sprinkled throughout its runtime. But something especially cool about The Lion King 1.5 is that of all the countless sequels in Disney's colossal cartoon catalog, it's one of the only ones in the entire bunch to have a pretty solid soundtrack. Something almost every Disney sequel suffers from in equal measure is that they all feel like they were made by people who were acutely aware of the fact that they were producing a sequel to a universally beloved hit film released by a studio so successful that it generates more revenue per year than Estonia and Iceland the countries combined. And while at first glance this might seem like a significant source of motivation, it inevitably leads to the downfall of pretty much every single one of them. Overextension. Let me be clear, by the way, nothing I'm about to say in any way negates the fact that even the worst movies take an immeasurable amount of effort to assemble, and the people who brought Disney sequels to life have my utmost respect. Even the lowest on my list still brought someone a lot of joy, and I never want to nullify the humanity in art for the sake of an easy joke. That said, every Disney sequel under the sun has a fucking terrible soundtrack. 100% mid, front to back. I'm talking Anthony Fantano, Migos Culture 3, 2 out of 10. This shit is not good. And this is because Disney Toons were trying to play the same ball game as Disney Animation Studios. This is kind of like that scene in Moneyball where Brad Pitt is like, if you try to play like the Yankees, if you try to play like, so if you're Oakland,
if we try to play like the Yankees in here, we will lose to the Yankees out there.
Stretching a small budget so thin you can see through it does not a good movie make. And the first in the long list of wrong turns nearly every Disney sequel takes is trying to compete with its original soundtrack by creating another original soundtrack. No, that's so dumb. Stop. Ew, yuck. Shut up, Cinderella 3: A Twist in Time. You're so stupid. Why do you sound like a Ratchet and Clank game? Instead, the smart money is in recycling a couple of the biggest bangers from the original film for an easy reprisal. And if Disney cuts songs from its final score, which they almost always do, you got 3 to 5 musical numbers for your sequel right there, without having to spend a dime. Then because licensing older music is baby world cheap compared to hiring new composers, you finesse a few pop phenoms from the charts of yesteryear to have your in-house talent belt out a cover of, and you got yourself a charming little film that isn't going to sound like a community theater production of Wicked. And would you look at that, that's exactly what The Lion King 1.5 does. The only original song in the entire film is its introduction, the aforementioned tunnel-digging Hellworld theme, which is actually written by Lebo M as well, and the rest are either recycled from the original or covers of already existent music. The second musical number in the film, Timon's I Want song titled That's All I Need, is actually just a barely retooled version of a song cut from The Lion King, called The Warthog Rhapsody. Hakuna Matata sees a reprisal as well, when Timon and Pumbaa discover the oasis that Simba soon runs into them in, but it's delivered as this non-diegetic, tongue-in-cheek sing-along where the two of them in the theater are singing over a montage of the two of them in the film, which is honestly just really cute, and the rest of the soundtrack is simply a collection of cleverly selected pop songs. Some more obvious, like The Lion Sleeps Tonight performed by Lebo M, or Kool and the Gang's Jungle Boogie performed by Drew K and the French, and then some more esoteric choices that complement the absurd nature of the film and its sense of self-awareness, like Henry Mancini's opening theme for Peter Gunn playing over a montage of Timon and Pumbaa trying to sabotage Simba and Nala's reunion so he doesn't leave them, complete with visual homage, Ennio Morricone's The Ecstasy of Gold from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly scoring their snail eating competition, or my personal favorite, Timon and Pumbaa breaking out into an extremely sincere sincere rendition of Sunrise Sunset from Fiddler on the Roof because Simba is starting to grow up. This is something Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead exemplifies to a T. Adaptations of Hamlet, most relevantly Kenneth Branagh's, given that both films were released around the same time, are given considerable budgets, with the tacit understanding that they'll probably never see a profit. In fact, this is true of pretty much every Shakespeare adaptation. With the exception of a few cartoon lion flicks, you can count the number of profitable films connected to the Shakespeare canon on one hand. Branagh's Hamlet is 4 hours long. It's the only unabridged cinematic adaptation of the play, and it is a masterpiece. It's mesmerizing in its composition, better even than Olivier's in my opinion, and it's one of my favorite Shakespeare adaptations of all time. But of the $18 million it cost to make, it only made 5 back. On the other side of the coin, Baz Luhrmann's electrifying adaptation of Romeo and Juliet released the same year with a similarly built cast, $4 million less in its budgets, and without the good graces of critics eager to see the interpretation, but it pulled in 68 big ones at the box office. Because Baz wasn't trying to be faithful to its text, he was trying to be faithful to its spirit. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead was produced on a budget of only $3 million. Instead of building sets, they filmed on location in Croatia and Slovenia, and its music is as bare bones as you can get. The composer, Stanley Myers, is wonderfully talented, so compositionally, the music is great. But to avoid the cost of paying for or recording an orchestra, Stoppard chose to score it almost entirely with MIDI instruments in the late 80s, with the occasional vibrato-soaked guitar riff thrown in for good measure. And the result is this goofy, almost minimalist early 2000s RTS soundtrack. This shit sounds like StarCraft Brood War. I feel like Bisu is gonna walk out any minute and say, "What art thou that usurped this time of night together with that fair and warlike form," before 3-0ing Savior at the MSL finals. But it works. It's fantastic in its lack of extravagance, in its lack of complexity. It feels deliberate and perfectly in step with the kind of whimsical goofiness the film embodies, by virtue of it not trying to compete with the films it shares a lineage with. Similarly, The Lion King 1.5 is a bit less technically robust than The Lion King, notably featuring a lot more static backgrounds than its big sister, but conceding in areas where the audience isn't likely to notice, allowed its artists to retain the same attention to detail and fluidity of movement in their foreground animation. So the film both looks and feels like one that could conceivably cost 4 times its price, not unlike the films that the Disney Renaissance began with. And I think whimsical is maybe the best word to describe The Lion King 1.5. The Lion King, even though I adore it, didn't really end up as the coming-of-age film that Katzenberg had hoped it would be. You know? For as much as its foundation lies in the sentiment of crossing the threshold into self-awareness, for lack of a better term, the film doesn't spend much time actually capturing it, instead compartmentalizing most of Simba's growth as an individual into a montage where he doesn't speak, and neglecting to show the growth of any of its other characters at all, illustrating the payoffs of their triumphs while spending precious little on the years they'd spend reaching them. But The Lion King 1.5 sort of makes up for this in its own weird way. Much like the text it originates from, most of its dialogue has no clear forward movement. It doesn't really feel like it's developing towards anything in particular, even though we know its eventual outcome, because that's how growing up actually feels. But they're given space to do so, or nothing at all the same. And this imbues it with a remarkably human spirit. For a movie about animals watching a movie about themselves based on a play about people who aren't sure they exist. The film's working title, and the title was released under in some parts of the world, was The Lion King 3 Hakuna Matata. Hakuna Matata, as the lyrics in The Lion King suggests, literally means no worries in Swahili, a phrase popularized among Western tourists by the song Jambo Bwana, written by the Mushrooms and covered by a hotel pop group called Safari Sound Band, often played in tourist destinations in East Africa beginning in the 1980s, because it contained a number of welcoming Swahili phrases like Habari Gani for how are you and Nzuri Sana for very well. Essentially, it's a greeting, acclimating its listeners to a new environment, a vote of confidence in our natural ability to develop an understanding of new places and new experiences as long as we're open to them, and an assurance that our time spent wherever we hear it will ultimately be good for us. No worries. In the context of The Lion King, it can at first be interpreted as Simba, under the tutelage of Timon and Pumbaa, learning to simply ignore the things in his life that are challenging, that the ethos of the song and their lifestyle is one of avoidance, a rejection of the notion of death, of grief, of sadness. In short, a refusal to grow up. But in The Lion King 1.5, we learn that Timon is taught the phrase by Rafiki to begin with, not as a tool for self-deception, but as an emotional ballast to carry him through his own loss. And these three were always fated to meet and to sing and to believe that they're going to turn out okay. And in this light, I think it speaks to the song's actual meaning. Not that nothing can ever go wrong, certainly none of us should believe that, but that things going wrong is simply part of the experience of being alive, and it'll be fine after they do. If something is daunting or unfamiliar or painful, that you'll persevere in spite of it, that it's not just wishful thinking, but an inevitability, a part of the circle. At the end of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead, the two of them are stood on the deck of their boat, now overrun by pirates as Hamlet sails away into the storm. And the corsairs who have attacked them reveal themselves to be the players who had appeared in Elsinore earlier in the tragedy to perform before Claudius. The same players who Rosencrantz and Guildenstern spoke to at the beginning of the film, offering their services as prostitutes and deriding the conception of plays and tragedies altogether, while revealing themselves to be some semblance of divinity within them. Our duo hand the lead player the letter, and after he reads their death sentence aloud, wearing the costume of a king, Guildenstern and Rosencrantz cope with the realization that their life is about to end by arguing the many reasons they ended up there to begin with. And Guildenstern proposes the entire essence of the play as a question. Who are we that so much should converge on our little deaths? I've been doing a lot of thinking while I've been watching all these Disney sequels and slowly losing my mind about the idea of worthiness. What being worthy even is or means to any one of us. What makes something worth remembering. After all, that's what Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead, and by extension, The Lion King 1.5 is really all about. It is both its novelty and its thesis, two seemingly insignificant characters paling in comparison to the world they exist within, being given a chance to simply be. And what an amazing, charming, and magnificently clever chance it is, even if the outcome, at the end of all things, doesn't necessarily change. Maybe the tragedy of Hamlet doesn't end the way it does, in spite of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern's efforts to change it. Maybe the play ends the way it does because of their presence, the countless silent interferences, and the many ripples that reach far beyond them. That's what Timon's name means. Worthy. It's Greek. Biblical Greek, to be specific. If you're ever curious why Timon and his family are explicitly Jewish in 1.5, he's named after one of the 7 deacons, a Hellenistic Jewish bishop who taught in Greece, or Syria, depends on the adaptation. Not to be confused with Timon of Athens and other of Shakespeare's tragedies about a misanthropic noble. Pumbaa is Swahili for foolish, as Rosencrantz in Stoppard's adaptation takes on a slower, gentler demeanor in contrast to Guildenstern's mind for reason, and The Lion King 1.5 defines these juxtaposed dispositions even further. Timon is sharp, but he's cynical and at times unkind, and he is made better by Pumbaa's warmth and joviality at the expense of intelligence which Timon lends him in turn. Both are equal in their worth. Maybe that's the answer. Every story is timeless in its own way, but I don't know if that feels right. Doesn't really feel honest. Maybe what it really is that we never had a lot to begin with. Good stories, that is. Maybe the ones we know as timeless are that way because we keep telling them to each other. The Black Swan is Perfect Blue, is Persona. Oh Brother, Where Art Thou is the Odyssey. Star Wars is the Hidden Fortress, 2001 A Space Odyssey, Prometheus. Dune is just a continuation of the Oresteia, Aeschylus' trilogy about the curse of the House Atreus. And Hamlet is just an Osirian myth. The great King Osiris, murdered by his envious brother Set, who appears to his son Horus after he flees into exile and instructs him to exact revenge on his treacherous uncle. Romeo and Juliet is Thisbe and Pyramus from Ovid's Metamorphoses, which itself was probably based on some other piece of writing, now lost to time, and so on, indefinitely. Taking from those who came before us is what art is, what it has always been, and will always be.
Good
Shakespeare
Lord.
understood this, and he became the great...
Good Lord. All these great films. Seven Samurai.
What it is all, and so on.
Okay.
Indefinitely. Taking from those who came before us is what art is.
Oh. Oh, it's a telemarketer. Wonder what they want. I'll find out later.
is, what it has always been, and
yeah, the Magnificent Seven and Seven Samurai.
Will always be. Shakespeare understood this, and
Hamlet.
he became the greatest
Or
writer.
no, that's Macbeth. Sorry, Macbeth. Dang. We were talking about Hamlet earlier.
In the history of our language. Walt understood this, and he built it into an empire. The only other passable sequel in Disney's entire catalog is Aladdin and the King of Thieves, but it's an adaptation of Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, which is good. That's why
Ali Baba
it's
had
almost
40 thieves.
good. It just suffers from the other mistakes I had mentioned, along with The Lion King 2. Overextension of budget, mishandling of soundtrack, sacrificing fluidity of motion for more dynamic set pieces. But it's close. Bottom of the top 3, but it's up there, you know? Somewhat memorable. I don't remember Beauty and the Beast, The Enchanted Christmas, and I watched it yesterday. Snow White, Pinocchio, Dumbo, Cinderella, The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, Mulan, Hercules, even Frozen was written in the 1840s. Almost every single Walt Disney animated feature ever released has been an adaptation of a formerly famous tale, and almost all of them were merely written recordings of already long famous oral traditions and beloved myths. Hunchback 2 is so poorly written, I had to watch another copy of it just to see if any scenes were cut out of mine. Lady and the Tramp sequel feels like it takes place in a bizarro version of the original film's world where none of its characters were ever likable. And I'm not sure I could explain what The Little Mermaid 2 was even trying to be. They're just mid. Inoffensively fine, but totally forgettable. I'm not trying to say that originality is dead or has never lived to begin with or something. I'm certainly not trying to say that I like what Disney does now, repeating their own adaptations. I hate the remakes. They offer nothing to the narrative tradition, and they're only produced to extend their copyrights. In 2003, they trademarked the phrase Hakuna Matata. No amount of Cape Shits or Star Wars or Danny narrative tradition repeating, and they're only produced to extend their copyrights. In 2003, they trademarked the repeating their own adaptations. I hate the remakes. They offer nothing to the narrative tradition, and they're only produced to extend their copyrights. In 2003, they trademarked the phrase Hakuna Matata. No amount of Cape Shits or Star Wars or Danny DeVito can change that the company they become is one that strong-arms theaters to prioritize their releases above competing films and then buys out their competition. They suck. If anything, The Lion King, the new Lion King, is the perfect exemplification of how Disney has learned all the worst lessons from their own successes. But we've heard this story before too. We just keep retelling the same stories over and over again. Every writer, a new variation. Every step forward, a different voice joining the chorus. Doing our best to recapture what our fathers used to read. And we love it. We can't help ourselves. Not even Shakespeare could. As Simba ascends Pride Rock, as he did at the end of The Lion King, Timon and Pumbaa unceremoniously pause the film, and we watch their past flash before us again as the tale rewinds, ready to be spun anew, as the many characters from the studio's illustrious past pile in to watch. And that's it. What makes a story truly timeless? Maybe it's when we can see ourselves in it.
Maybe so.
Have a good night.
Admit me chorus to this history. Who, prologue-like, your humble patience pray, gently to hear, kindly to judge. Our play!
And I never thought, hey baby, I'd ever see the day. 'Cause baby, when I saw love approached, I turned and looked the other way.
for watching. As always, big thank you to my patrons for making this video possible, especially these guys. And a very special thank you to Mini Tantrum, Ben Samuels, Skrylark, Daddy Drywall, DK Combo, John the Memetist, Lexa Ninja, Henrik Johan, Sephirpaz, Alex Callan, Dr. Maushin, Walter Shepard, Blues Young, Israel Nebs, Smokeweed Sephiroth 420, Taylor Shodel.
Wow. Way more Patreon supporters than we've ever had. Sheesh. Okay. So yeah. Bread Sword and The Lion King and the Disney sequel Curse. Several sequels have come out since this. And here's what I'll say. The ones that I've seen, specifically Moana 2. Okay, Frozen 2, not good either. Moana 2, pretty mid, if I'm being honest with myself. Pretty mid. But I would say it's at least not terrible. I mean, yeah. Anyway. Yeah, so that was Bread Sword and Giotto Cook. I hope that was satisfactory for you. Sorry if I seemed a little bit out of it. My brain's a little deep fried at this point. I've had a lot going on. I'm so sorry. But anyway, I'm going to keep going from here. I'm going to head up, and I've got some work to do. But hopefully you'll see this posted here soon. And yeah, guess till next time, everybody. Signing off. I am Nate. You all take care. We'll see you in the next one. Peace.